talking to the mic.
It's 1 week.
Oh, is it? Oh, we're doing it. Okay, we're having the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Decide what
It's
comes out. I mean.
1 week where the faculty and all the students get together. And then at the end of that 1 week, each faculty member is assigned 5 or 6 students. And then you work with those 5 or 6 students for the semester.
Yeah.
And then you go back in April for a week. And it's a 2-year program, and it's sort of self-administered by the students. They come up with their own study plans. But it's really dynamic and really intensive, and I think it's great.
Sounds kind of awesome.
Yeah.
If you need a master's degree, you know where to go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Free advertising for Vermont College of Fine Arts. Okay. That is gratis. All right. Let me set things up, and then we can talk. First of all, the new film that we're going to talk about is called Borderline, and it's directed by Rebbie Ratner, who we're hanging out with tonight. Hi, Rebbie.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure and honor. And because there are a number of reasons, and Michel has been a great guest a couple of times now, I thought because of his experiences on the subject, too, and because we were going to be meeting, I just thought, maybe it might be nice to have a co-host for this particular segment. Well, I think I dragged you into another segment the last time when you were over at that studio.
Yeah, and it
was kind of an odd
thing. So I think whenever you're at a loss, you drag me in.
I like that idea.
Liven things up or to make them dull. I don't know which.
Maybe to balance it or level it off. Okay. I don't think this was dull at all. I just want to say for sure, Rebbie, because your document is anything but dull. That's for sure.
Didn't mean to imply her document.
No,
I don't think.
I know that.
I certainly appreciate the clarification for the audience.
For the audience, and because
I did not read it that way.
Your subject, not only the making of the film and the film in itself, in terms of its deployment of your talent as a filmmaker, but also in your subject. I mean, neither are dull enough for.
No, I think the film is absolutely extraordinary. And this is your first feature-length documentary?
Yes.
Very impressive.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
I'll hand over the doc.
More than impressive.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Extraordinary piece of work. And you're very brave to make it. I mean, I know how tough this subject matter is. I made a film about borderline, and it's a challenge. And I think you do it with complete grace and empathy, and also the filmmaking is really beautiful. But maybe you want to say a little bit about the film first, because we're trying to get people to see it if they have not seen it already.
Well, just by the fact that it's on this podcast. No, I'm kidding. But I will make I will do it. I will have done an intro.
Good, that helps me.
Kind of saying
I'm not so good at that.
No, but I still think it would be very helpful to give a little background about Borderline and how you came upon your subject in particular. Her name is
Regina.
Regina.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll just keep it Regina.
Yeah.
And also how you did cope with committing yourself to doing this project with Regina, since it requires a level of commitment.
Sure. Well, so I think a few things. So, I did the film because I was in a treatment facility for borderline personality disorder, and I had been dealing with my own mental health issues for more than 10 years, but very actively seeking help. Well, actually, I've always actively sought help, but getting increasingly frustrated as my 30s wore on and I wasn't getting answers. So by the time I started making this film, I had returned to get my MFA, which is what we've all just been talking about, because I had sort of screwed up my my MFA. I went to get my MFA in film when I was fresh out of college, and my final thesis film just sort of collapsed in disaster, totally due to interpersonal stuff, which is a complete hallmark of the diagnosis. And so anyway, so the point is, what I went back to grad school to complete it, and essentially sent my professors, many of whom I had burned bridges with because I was masterful at that, and I had to sort of find the few people that I hadn't had damaged relationships with who might support my bid for re-entry, and they did. And I think there were probably people who initially were not in favor of my return, in part just but they made the good decision, which was to have me return. So I think that means a lot of them sort of stepped past their own personal opinions about me and did, I guess, what a good teacher does, which is say, okay, give her another chance. So I went back to school to make this film.
Can I ask how many years we're talking about between?
A lot. It was 17 years from my time of entry to when I requested re-entry. They were like, we've never had that before. And it was about 12 years between when I had left or, in theory, vaguely not graduated. Yeah.
Okay. So, wow. So it was actually 5 years. You were struggling with your master's for 5 years. That and didn't finish it.
No, I had done like my films. I had done thesis film. I had done, all of this sort of coursework, and I had actually done my final film. And I had done a lot of work on it. I did a lot of DPing, and I was, in film school, different people get designated different roles that they end up being sort of good at. So I was a DP, so I shot a lot of people's sort of narrative films, not so much documentary. And so, so I was, I was doing a lot of work. I was a hard worker, and I showed up and completed stuff. I would say I took longer than I probably should have taken on some projects. So, and then when I did my final film for UT, the film that I came out with, I thought was not good. So I was very unmotivated to hand it in, sort of not understanding, just like hand it in, do the work to get the degree, and then you can make more stuff. And so I didn't do that, and I didn't write the final report. And by not writing the final report, I basically did all the work, but write the final report, and therefore didn't get the degree. And so when I reapplied or requested readmission, they said, okay, you can come back. However, you have to do a thesis film. So this was that film.
Wow.
Well, it's a pretty major thesis film. How long did it take you to make the film?
The film I really started, I guess, at the tail end of 2012, really 2013. I actually didn't, everyone who's done nonfiction stuff knows, I think even fiction, probably, the relationship that you have with the people in front of the camera is totally critical, and how you navigate that determines whether you really have a film or not, I think. I don't understand directors who have, like, horrid relationships with their subjects, how that survive. I mean, I know horror, but I mean, it's just impossible. It's just hard. So I would say 2013. I did most of the filming in 2013, and then my relationship with Regina totally collapsed for a while.
Because, of course, it had to, right?
Here's the thing. I think I learned a lot about ethics making this film and being like ethical in how I treat the people who I'm filming. Mm-hmm. And so what I did was I filmed someone who she had a complicated interaction with without first checking with her.
I see.
And so she felt not wrongly betrayed. And so
so you're giving her a lot of credit for that. But are you can I ask you, there is a point in the film where there's another woman who you guys go out to go to some
we go to Barbara is her name, and we go
famous psychologist who's going to diagnose Regina and this other person, right? And you're going to a restaurant right before, and there's a big dramatic episode there with the falling out. Is that who you're talking about?
No, I mean Barbara, who was also in the film. Yeah. Look, there was a lot going on in those moments where at that point I knew that Regina was the main person that I was following. So I had this sort of, I felt deeply conflicted about how to respond, because there was this sort of like whole triangulation in the relationships that was going on where I felt that I didn't want to do a lot to damage the relationship with Regina, and I couldn't figure out how to navigate. And I had also put them together, not knowing that there would be this kind of friction.
But they didn't know each other extremely well.
They had just met for the first time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And they're going to see Dr. Gunderson at McLean.
Yes.
And it's an extraordinary scene. The tension in that scene is palpable.
It is. And it's a documentary film.
I'm like, I didn't do anything.
Dream,
it was this weird. It was a dream. But it was a complete dream, and at the same time, I felt like I was like filming reality TV. Yeah. So it was this bizarre.
It's
I knew in my head, I was like, okay, I have some stuff to edit here. We've got something. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, feeling a little dirty about getting something.
I see. Well, you didn't manipulate the situation to result that way. It that would have been...
Yeah, no.
Knowing that and putting them together, knowing you're going to get like a dramatic public display, that would have been
right
an unseemly thing to do, but that's far from what happened. When you say you arrived at this idea that Regina was your focal subject of Borderline, was that I'm kind of interested in knowing like what the other what Barbara was in contention or something?
Well,
or what exactly, or were you thinking of doing something on a broader, more subject oriented?
So honestly, like when I started doing this, I had not made. I mean, my goal making this project was it was like for the first time I had a really humble goal in my life, which was like finish something and do not burn bridges. So those were my two goals. That was it.
That's good.
And I was like, just do that, and who cares what the hell comes out? And so. So anyway, that's just what it was. But
yeah, no, that's terrific. Yeah.
But what happened was, I kind of quickly figured out that to make the job easier, you want to have you want it to make the job easier. You want to have like willing subjects, and Regina felt like she had sort of unzippered herself and like opened up her her skin and exposed her insides to me in a way that I'd never really happened before. Well, I'd never done nonfiction before, but that felt sort of effortless in terms of working with her. And so I felt like with some of the other people, I was really having to fight to get that. And I was so interested with her. I had fun working with her, never like a dull moment, and so you want to go back for more in general in relationships when people are interesting to you.
Yeah, I think that there are documentary subjects, it's hard to make generalizations, who have a real sense of urgency to share their story. And you sense that with your character. And in a way, that's the ideal situation. There are others who I think want to tell the story, but don't necessarily know exactly where to begin or how to do that necessarily. And it's the reticence which makes them, in some respects, more complicated or more difficult subjects. I certainly think, in your case, you found an ideal subject. I mean, I would say also that Michelle Maren, who is the subject of my film, is also, in a simple sense, an ideal subject. She certainly had a story that she wanted to share and was more than willing to share it, in every detail that she could summon up and remember. So, I do think that to a certain extent, documentary filmmakers do cast their movies, not in the traditional sense, but you really do have to find a subject that is articulate, that is outgoing, that is willing to sort of bare their soul. And you certainly did that in your film, with your film.
No, I was thinking about Michelle. No, I mean, as did you in yours. And I don't know if you get spoiled. Like, I think have you become spoiled by that? I mean, I'm looking for other new projects, and I have a very high bar for what I'm looking for I don't think you can do. I mean, it depends on the kind of films you want to do, but without a real and sometimes to your point, you can have reticence, and that can be equally interesting and complicated. But I'm just curious for you.
Well, Adam and I were just talking about a film called Nobody's Business by Alan Berliner.
I know that film.
And that is the most, Alan is making a film about his father, who is the most difficult, reticent character ever, I think, put on the silver screen. And it is that reticence that actually makes the film so extraordinary, and also to a certain extent very funny, because Alan has to work so hard to make his father say anything. Anyway, the dynamic there, it's really, the film is about Alan and his father,
exactly.
And it's the dynamic between the two that makes the film so fascinating. So, I mean, again, I'm not saying that that there's only one type of person that makes the ideal film subject. just saying that there's certain film subjects that are certainly easier to work with than others.
But do you, I mean, I'm curious, like I'm, in looking for new things, and I don't know exactly what form the new thing will take yet, but do you find that, I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to listen to myself to say, do I want to keep filming this person or this thing I started? I'm sort of testing little things out and seeing how I feel. And I'm not sure, and I'm like, do I? So I'm wondering if that's sort of, I'm using my litmus test to sort of, do I want to go back and do I want to go on another date with this person? For whatever they offer.
I can appreciate the idea of a litmus test, and you have set with your film, Borderline, a very, very high standard for yourself. That I can see clearly. Nonetheless, I still think on a certain level, every single film project is unique. It actually establishes its own set of unique problems that need to get solved, and that's ultimately the creative challenge. And so, I'm not saying that you could put yourself in any situation, but I do think the idea of precisely what you just described, of maybe doing experiments and getting a sense of what it looks like, what it feels like, what your rapport is like with the film subject is the ideal way to sort of launch a new project. And I tend not to overthink things. I tend to jump very quickly into the next project because the idea of not having a film project in my life is so frightening to me that I just move very quickly. Now, the amount of time I'm going to spend on a single project may vary. I may make it into a 5-minute film. I may make it into a 20-minute film. I'm not really, at this point, after making an autobiography of Michelle Maren, I'm not sure I'd like to make another feature-length documentary. Possibly never again. I've done it for so long, and I've made really a number of them. And I'm kind of looking for stories that I could, let's say films that I could sort of fit more into the 30 or 40-minute time frame, and I make that number up. But I know that I don't know if I have the stamina to spend 5 years on another single feature-length documentary project. And I also think the advantage to maybe doing shorter work for me is that it would give me a chance to sort of experiment and be maybe sort of creatively even more ambitious than I've ever attempted before, which means a lot to me.
Yeah. No, I hear. I've started shooting something else, and I'm sort of sitting on it a little bit. I started filming last week, and I'm just not sure. But one of the things that I'm coming up against is, I'm using the same camera. Yes, I've learned things about operating and how I would operate differently, but it's still me behind the camera. So there's still certain stylistic similarities that are emerging because but I'm bored with myself. And so I really want to do something that's visually so different. And that's, there was this whole other, I don't want to repeat what I just did sort of stylistically or formally either. And that's, and I'm sort of, I'm boring myself a little bit.
No, I think I'd like you to talk a little more about Borderline, your film, because I think it's really fascinating. Maybe a little more about your relationship with the subject. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention is that I think you incorporate interviews with Dr. Gunderson and Dr. Linhan and others absolutely seamlessly. I never do that. But you take your subject, it's in some respects a kind of classic cinema verite film, and then you intercut these interviews with, experts in the field of borderline, and you do it seamlessly. The film just doesn't miss a heartbeat. And I think in part it's you keep the interviews quite short. They're black and white, so they announce themselves very easily, and you know that you're going to a different place, and it's the film is moving somewhere else. And yet I thought you did that beautifully.
Did you collaborate on any of this, or
Did I collaborate on?
on this?
Yes,
construction.
Yes, very much.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll tell. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, go ahead. You were going to say. No. So first of all, I just for the actual filming of it. Mm-hmm. I did predominantly all of the verite shooting, but the stuff that you saw in the going up to Boston and the fight between, or the disagreement, whatever you want to call it, between Regina and Barbara, that was not my camera work. And I think so in terms of sort of how someone functions behind the camera and how you relate to the people in front of the camera, I think there's also another reason that footage came out the way it came out. And I think the person who's operating... Is that
B-roll? Is that what you're saying?
It's not B-roll. It's just that the person who was operating, because I'm the director, and if I mess up, I only have me to blame, and I can say and do, in theory, what I want to do, and no one's going to fire me for it. So I have this... Regina and I would often interact. You know, we'd be talking to each other while I'm filming her. We had a very conversational relationship while filming, and then she would bleed into something, and I'd sort of be more observing, and then it would slide out. And so, so that didn't happen as much in that one particular section. And so that was just sort of in terms of learning from the people I'm working with. Just, me having a little more reserve and impulse control in terms of opening my mouth when I'm working with subjects and sort of, I was trying to be strategic about it, but being a little bit more reserved in my strategy. So there was that. Then for editing, and then the interviews were the first thing we shot. And they were. I mean, we shot them throughout, but that because I had no idea what I was going to do. I had not made a film in 12 years, so I had no idea what to do.
Since you left grad school.
So I messed around. I'd made something, but I hadn't made.
Okay, so just describe how in fact you did meet Regina, and that a little bit of that origin.
Sure. So I mean, what I did was, so in terms of how I met Regina, because the diagnosis is theoretically stigmatized, and I certainly was told to be careful about how I shared that information with people about my own history. I was aware that it was going to be hard to potentially find people. So my initial method was, let me reach out to people who've already self-identified and written books or blog about it, which I did. That was a total dead end because I was basically reaching out to people who were already authoring their own story. They don't need me to re-author them unless they see it as a possible way of sort of helping them publicize their work.
And you don't do that, right, with the film, right?
Yeah. So then I just was out of desperation. I put an ad on Craigslist, and I put it on, Craigslist is amazing for casting, I think. I really think Craigslist can be amazing. I highly recommend.
FYI, Michelle, in case you're...
Yeah, did she find you through, what was the Michelle?
No, she...
What?
Michelle Maren emailed me, but she had seen a film I made called Jupiter's Wife.
Right, she was very, very swept away by that documentary.
Yes, that's what
I fell in love with him as a filmmaker, and reached out to Michelle.
Right, that was my sense from what I read about the story behind Michelle Maren, behind how you started working with her. But so basically I started reaching out to people. I put an ad in Craigslist. I think I put it in a couple different jobs wanted sections, like writers, and I maybe tested out accounting just to see what I would get in that field. Didn't have as many responses.
I think we have an app here, swipe left for...
Yeah.
Right. Casting your documentary.
Oh, that would be amazing. That's a good idea.
If you have, all these different people could put up their profiles if they have bipolar or if they have borderline, and we should ask you also about distinguishing between these disorders, so we have, I'd have a better understanding. But so go on.
So I basically put an ad up. I got responses. Based on the responses,
okay.
I would email. Then
Did you care geographically or?
Well, I was in Texas. I was actually in Austin, Texas, because I had to be physically in Austin for that semester of school. However, I was able to sort of film the film not there. And because I also had a good therapist here and my family's here and I wanted to sort of base myself in New York, I really mostly put the ad. I tested it in Austin out of curiosity to see what I would get. But I got I got a lot more people in New York, which gives me many more options.
I wonder how come that is.
And I think, so that's what I did. But And then I started emailing back and forth, and if it made sense, we would meet for coffee. And then from there, I was a little bit indiscriminate with like deciding who to interview. I probably have like 15 interviews of people that I did, and then from those interviews, I started following.
Did you need them to sign?
Yes. Releases
just for those interviews. And
I did cover my bases, so I knew that the possibility of filming them beyond those interviews existed. So, I had them sign something that would allow me to do that. And
gotcha.
I think I was clear. Regina would say that she didn't know that it was going to not be anything more than a student film. And she's not wrong about that. Like, I didn't have any... I didn't know, the point is, I didn't know that whatever that means to her, which might mean it stays within the community of UT Austin, where I was at school. And I think my sense is I probably wasn't like, gee, we're going to try to make this into this, feature length thing that's going to go to festivals. And my aspirations from all of that I had been through had become much more humble. So I think just on the basis of that, I wouldn't have said that.
Yeah, right, I understand. You were trying not to burn bridges, so you wouldn't intentionally withhold information that you weren't trying to put. Yeah, I
just didn't know. And honestly,
not,
I had no idea. Right. And then but I know enough. I mean, I've done film for 20 years on and off. I know about release. I know you get people to sign releases that allow you to film, to have access to their, if it's a possibility. Look, some of the quote unquote experts, I was not going to be following them in their lives. So I had separate releases that I used for them that were just for the interview. But that was not the case with the people that had the diagnosis that I interviewed.
How has she responded to the film? I'm curious. Because I was at the screening where she was not present, I think, at Doc.
There were two? Did you have two screenings? Or?
We did.
And did she come to one of them, your premiere?
She did. So Regina's Seen the film. I've obviously screened it for her at first, just the two of us. I didn't want to put her through. I wouldn't. Even
did
if
you sleep
the film
the night before.
No. She's seen it. She saw it far before anyone ever saw it publicly, other than when we were doing test screenings, which was a different thing anyway. And then she did see it. She actually sat through the screening when we were at Big Sky Film Festival. Big Sky Film Festival, documentary film festival. I think we just sat next to each other, and I think I just had my hand on her knee because it's really, she does not like watching it, and I try to be really careful and not speak for her, but my sense is it's not comfortable for her to watch it.
Okay, well that's fairly fair, kind of a broader way to say it. And was she involved in any Q&As at all?
Yeah, so she does. She's amazing about submitting herself to Q&As. I mean, I think she actually likes the Q&As because it's a chance for her to speak unedited.
And give her a version or to kind of tweak things. So
I mean, there's nothing I would love more than for her, I actually have to do this on our website. I have to, we need to do a blog section, but I mean, I want her to have the freedom to speak for herself at this point without my editing anything. Use it as she wishes, and I'll stand behind her and support her or stand beside her.
You can speak to that with Michelle.
How was that with Michelle?
Did you ever do a Q&A? Because you did Doc NYC also, didn't you, last year?
I was at your Q&A. It was incredible.
She loves Q&As.
Yeah, I would imagine she does.
Generally, I mean, I've done several Q&As with Michelle Maren.
She likes to moderate them. And
I tend to sort of sit and listen and smile and applaud her. I mean, I think she does very well. She's incredibly articulate. I think she likes an audience.
Sure.
It really inspires her. And so, no, I mean, I think I don't think she necessarily likes watching all of the film. I mean, I know for a fact there's scenes that she's been very explicit and said that there's scenes in the film that make her very, very uncomfortable.
Sure.
And she actually gets up and leaves.
It's too intense for her.
It's just too intense for her. But I mean, I think I can understand that. But I think she certainly loves the Q&As, and I do think there is a sense, you see a film. I mean, I never felt that you edited Regina in a way that that made her. Well, what I'm trying to say is that her persona in the film strikes me as entirely authentic. I had the feeling that I was with her. I was with the two of you, in a sense, on this adventure. And, and when I see her on the screen, I get a sense of that is probably a very accurate reflection of what it's like to be with her. Now, she may say something entirely different, and that would surprise me, but I don't think that you could be accused of... Well, I mean, again, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say I don't think you could be accused of distorting, a truth or a reality. I think it looks to me like you were very faithful to your subject. And I think most good documentary filmmakers are. And, the other thing, when people do documentary portraits, I often think, what would have happened if the subject of the film had made the film herself or himself?
Well, in your case, you did sort of give some slack there for that.
Yes. But what I was going to say is that your film, Borderline, I imagine that that's the film that Regina would have made. At least this is in my imagination.
What do you
that
think
it's
of that?
very much about her. It feels like her. It kind of looks like her. The camera work, I imagine that that's how she would have shot the film herself.
I would love to hear what Regina would say.
Well, we have her on the phone.
Yeah,
as it happens.
She would have a very interesting response to that. I don't know what it would be. Actually, I have no idea what it would be. I think. What do I think? I don't know. Well, so there was another film. Do you know that other film that was Vice aired it? It's called Ada or something. It's about this woman who has borderline. So I think the thing that's hard when you're filming, or what I was interested in filming and what you were able to capture with Michelle, was a lot of the interpersonal stuff. And, be it Michelle on the phone with her father, who sort of disowned her, essentially. So what I found with the film that Ada, that woman, filmed of herself, which was fascinating because she was getting inside her own head, was that I think if you're filming yourself, where it can get difficult, unless you're just imagining what it would be like to film yourself, is to film you in interaction with other people, and you in interaction with other people when it gets a little dicey. Right. And so I remember for a while thought, if I can't find someone, I guess I'll have to put myself in front of the camera, which I don't think I want to do because I don't think I'd be the most interesting person to watch. So I don't know if anyone would be able to do, even you could imagine a film of yourself, but the act of actually doing it.
No, I was saying.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the one area where I wish I had sort of gotten other parts of Regina that I regret not capturing is there's sort of a deep sadness that I think is very hard to access in her.
But one can only imagine, and this was actually going to be my next question, is she suffering? One gets this feeling of how exhausting, how exhausting it is to be with somebody and to commit yourself to putting yourself in their lives for such a period of time, and that's but for it to be the person who's going through it, and just how exhausting and over your whole life. That's it's suffering.
No, I think that's a good point. I think I appreciate you saying that. I think my concern is that sometimes gets lost on audience because I don't think it's an accident that I cast Regina, because I think I truly relate to her aggression in a way. But I think people can get caught up in the aggression aspect
and just
of
think,
her.
what a bitch.
Yeah.
And that's not get beyond that. Right.
Yeah.
And see that nobody who chooses to be that way, and it's exhausting.
Right. And I think she sort of is hyper vigilant.
Yeah.
So I think Regina in the film, what we're seeing. We are seeing her borderline. The other thing is, I did call the film Borderline. I didn't call it Regina. So it really was sort of where and I'm so familiar with the diagnosis because of my own history with it, and because I've actually lived with people who have it. So I've lived among women who have it, and we're always like, oh, that's That's really borderline of you right there. So
Well,
we're sort of
take a moment then and actually define the terms for everyone, because I think these terms are used indiscriminately to some degree. Personally, I can say that's the case. Where
Likewise.
I'm saying borderline, and now bipolar is another term, and I think the terms get
yeah. Well, I mean,
diluted.
I think it's funny because people will say things that are borderline crazy. So I always also associate the word borderline with just an adjective that sort of leads to sort of borderline insane or something, which is totally different as well. As but I think so bipolar. The reason that I think so bipolar and borderline personality disorder, aside from the fact that I think bipolar people use like BP as the sort of the initials for the diagnosis, and with borderline it's BPD. So there's multiple ways the two diagnoses just get confused sort of phonetically. But additionally, with bipolar, because people think it's about mood shifts, right? And I'm actually not as familiar with. I mean, I'm familiar with it in the sort of popular culture sense, but there's these sort of extreme mood shifts, and borderline is not so dissimilar in this sort of notion of mood shifts, but it's a really, I think, I'm not a therapist, so I can't so much speak to what it feels like, but I think it has a different quality to it, the feeling of the shift. So with borderline, I would say that borderline is fundamentally a diagnosis, or certainly when I went into treatment initially, where people are doing all of these behaviors to manage their emotional space because they can't tolerate intense feelings.
Okay.
And ironically, they feel intensely.
Sure.
So it becomes a diagnosis where people engage in behaviors like cutting or suicide attempts or drug use or sex or aggression toward people as a way of managing, as a sort of an emotional avoidance.
Gotcha.
And so, and they call it regulating, like you're using people to self-regulate. So I might cut you off if you, I might not talk to you if you don't call me, and I'm sort of regulating my own feelings by doing that.
She just did that with her mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I know.
Did you get that sense when you were working with Michelle?
Yes, but I also wanted to, the other. I think the other way to describe borderline, or another important component, is what's referred to as splitting. And kind of seeing the world in black and white, and there's no middle ground. And they in terms of how, a borderline very often sees themselves in those terms as well. So it could be total adulation, and an idealization at one moment, and then, a split second later, just devaluation and the total opposite. But the extremes are really what I think defined borderline, again, the term splitting. And, it's very, very hard for a layperson, an outsider, to really understand borderline unless they've actually experienced it firsthand. Now, you've experienced it firsthand, and I think you describe it very effectively. I didn't know anything about borderline when I started an autobiography of Michelle Maren. And so I got what's called on-the-job training. And it was difficult.
What did you learn? Like, what was some of that? Did you read about the splitting or the devaluing and idealizing and then come to sort of say, oh, yeah, that's what she's doing? Or did you pick it up and then subsequently begin to investigate it? How much did you learn by observing and feeling what she was doing and then researching? And how much did you...
Well, I'd say in general, for the first almost 2 years of our collaboration, things were very, very smooth and simple and straightforward. And then after a certain point, things got more complicated. And I began to sort of experience certain things with Michelle Maren that I didn't entirely understand. And she actually describes borderline herself in the film very much like you do. The inability to to deal with intense emotions, being very thin-skinned or having no emotional skin, I think is another way it's sometimes described. And it seems from an outsider like almost overreacting, not quite understanding why things always feel so intensely dramatic. So I think it was after about 2 years, I did actually begin to read about borderline after I began to experience some
in a
of
way
the...
so you would know how to cope?
Were there relational things that were unfolding that made you need to look into it to try to understand? Were you getting confused by responses and questioning your own...
Well, it's a long story.
Sure.
It really unfolded over a period of 5 years. And yes, I think there were times that I was confused and that I just could not figure out exactly why Michelle Maren was responding to certain things the way she did. So I did begin to read. And the more I read, I think, the more I began to understand certain aspects of borderline. Fundamentally, just to make a long story short, the working relationship got progressively more and more strained. And by the end, it was very difficult. So I think I went from, the idealized filmmaker to the opposite end of the spectrum, where I was no longer trusted, that I was no longer, she even says it in a scene. She gets angry and she says that she doesn't trust me any longer. And she also says that she feels that I don't trust her. In other words, it was very volatile, it was very unpredictable, and it got progressively more and more difficult. Whether or not this is a typical, what you would refer to as a typical unfolding of a working relationship or a relationship with someone with borderline, I'm not sure, but that certainly seems to be the case.
I think probably with someone who's struggling to find good treatment for themselves, so they can begin to, if you have the diagnosis, recognize the signs of relationship collapse and where you play a role in that. I think that probably is the case. And then I think if you are not, I actually don't even know. It's funny. I was the person who was operating camera in the scene in my film, where Barbara and Regina were at the restaurant.
At the Boston segment.
Yes, in the Boston section of the film, was exceptionally good at interacting with Regina and with Barbara in a way that I was like, let me take a page from your book, in terms of sort of de-escalating, but also observing, so not pushing them in one direction or another.
Without pushing too hard.
Yeah,
that kind of
and so where she did something where even though they were at odds at the time, Beth Cloutier, who was shooting that, who's great and amazing as a DP, had the good sense to not, to sort of keep herself outside of that dynamic. I don't know, though, that she could have done that if she was shooting them, as a director for, a year or two. And I think, from what you're saying, I'll tell you the thing that I learned working on this film, and I might have learned it on any film, but particularly this, because particularly this film where there were going to be interpersonal issues that came up, and I absolutely knew that, and I knew it was going to be on me because I just knew from what I had learned in my treatment that I could become sort of an attachment object onto which things got played out. And so I anticipated that, and not only sort of anticipated that, but invited that a little bit because I thought it could be interesting. It was real. I mean, it's sort of what happens is to have to be uncomfortably direct sometimes with Regina, which I wasn't good at being because the trust was constantly because
on the line. And you had to manage that.
Yeah,
so
and
you
I don't
could make a feature film.
Right, and so I didn't. By the way, think it was going to be a feature. I just shot. Right. I just shot a lot because I was afraid I didn't have anything.
You keep coming back to that scene with Barbara and why was it important that they have this meal together? Well, why wasn't it okay for one just to walk out on that scene? I mean, it would have been.
That's a good question. I think. Well, number one, I had engineered the two of them. Basically, Gunderson, Dr. Gunderson.
I want to come to that too. That's
okay. So, I mean, but basically, I was allowed to bring two people up to Boston to film.
Diagnosis.
He was like, I'll see two people.
And diagnose them.
Yes. And to be honest, they were mostly diagnosed. So in that scene where Regina's requesting a diagnosis, that's her own
Because was she legitimately just doubting and second guessing all of the past diagnoses?
I don't actually believe that she was legitimately questioning it. I think she wanted to hear it from an expert.
Who are the other people diagnosing her?
I mean, she was at Columbia University Medical School. They diagnosed her. I think they know they sort of have a history of treating borderline.
All right, because I want to set it up a little bit also for people listening.
Sure.
That Dr. Gunderson is like an author and like one of the leading.
I think he actually sort of helped get the borderline diagnosis into the DSM, into
so
DSM-3.
He's a major figure in
correct. People come from many
culture.
Places. Yeah. I think he's recently retired, but people travel far and wide to see him.
Yeah, in fact, the borderline clinic at McLean is called
in Virginia.
Gunderson. No, in Boston.
Outside Boston.
It's called the Gunderson Center.
Right.
The Gunderson residence.
Right. Yeah. Right. Oh well.
And I was actually there. I was at that. So he actually ran groups that I was in as a patient. Okay. Yeah. So I saw how he worked a little bit.
Good.
And
my quick question is but that seemed or my observation that for her that came it was definitely the word of truth of God or whatever. If for her it was what she needed to hear. And with the level, she seemed devastated, but also maybe relieved on some level, too, to have that diagnosis and to believe it finally, because at least she understood that something was wrong, that she maybe didn't have control over, or something.
I mean, that's so interesting, because for the people who are watching the film, the narrative, I work with an editor on this, so I co-edited this film, and I've only solo. Whose name is Pascal Trammell, and he's incredible. But I've actually worked with 3 editors on the film because 2 of the editors moved away. But the other person was
not because
edited it so long. No, not because we had a relationship collapse on account of my dysfunction. No, we have loving, amazing relationships. Actually, I'm very proud to say. Sarah Zandia is the first person who came on, and we worked together for almost a year. And then this woman, Anita Gabrosik, came in because Sarah and I were really struggling, and it actually worked. So the 3 of us worked together on it for about a month, and we sort of did all 3 of us bring different things to the table as editors. Sarah's got amazing comic timing. Anita can sew a scene together and not use jump cuts and truly make something make sense. So, I mean, everybody has a different strength, and I think the goal was for all of us to use our strengths. And so we sort of edited by committee. It was like, does it go or does it stay? Because Sarah and I were stuck. And then Pascal and Sarah moved away, and Anita actually, they both happened to move out of New York. So then I thought I was possibly done editing. So I had Pascal came by recommendation just as someone to look at the film to give me feedback. And when he came, I was like, oh wow, I feel like he totally gets what I'm trying to do. I feel like I'm very connected to his mind, his mind. And so we started working together. And I mean, as you know, in terms of just a collaboration, I don't imagine, I mean, he's in terms of working with editors in general, like I foresee a long future collaboration with him in general. I mean, it's incredible. And he edited on our website. He really did the editing of most of the videos. So we have like 350 videos on our website. And he, did you know that? We have a website and it says video archive, which we have to change. And it is 350 videos that are 1 to 3 minutes long from all of the top experts, from Marshall Linehan and Peter Fonagy and John Gunderson and people with the diagnosis. I put myself on there just to make sure.
Wait, are you saying they're diagnosing?
No, I say
that.
All of the black and white interviews that you saw, like the black and white interviews,
interstitials or whatever.
The interstitial stuff, because we were sitting on footage from like the top people, like like Otto Kernberg, who we couldn't get in the film.
Otto.
Peter Fonagy, who's another who created this treatment called mentalization-based therapy, which I think is like totally critical for anyone who has the diagnosis to try to get access to. You know, we had him, which we couldn't fit him into the film, which is such a travesty.
So you put all this footage.
So we put all this. We cut it all.
Since you're mentioning.
So the website is www.borderlinethefilm.com.
Borderlinethefilm.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we have, and the videos are on the video archive page, and they're broken down into 36 categories. And we also have a YouTube channel, which is the same videos, called Borderliner Notes.
So you can also go on YouTube, Borderline Notes.
Yeah. And then we know how many people are actually viewing it. So that's also kind of good. But
yeah, well, at the risk of repeating what Michelle's point, it is the pace of it, and
Thank you.
It's just it really works.
Yeah, I mean, I credit, like, I think Pascal is an incredible sense of rhythm and timing, and and I think he and I, you know, you edit your own stuff essentially, you know. So if you were to work with an editor, which I don't know, have you ever worked with an editor?
Well, I have worked with editors on occasion, but you know, I love editing and I love shooting, and I sort of see them as one and the same and sort of part of an organic process. And I'm going to edit till the very end, till I can no longer, you know, see the screen. I love it. You know, I find it so challenging and creative.
It is.
So,
Editing is super challenging. Yeah.
So, do you? Is your website active? You get a sense that people are really using
right. I mean, I can get a better sense from the YouTube channel, because we look at the analytics from Google, YouTube. So I think our YouTube channel, I have to check today to see how many people have signed up. I think we are at, like, for the channel, we're at over 50,000 views right now. But, you know, we have, 300 and something videos. So that's, you break it. Marsha Linehan is the main draw. Right. You know, she's the sort of this creator of this treatment called dialectical behavioral therapy, which.
What does that involve? I mean, just
what is dialectical?
Well, and also maybe describe the other. You mentioned Otto's.
Sure. Have you heard of Otto Kernberg? Or no? I was
joking around.
Your job.
I shouldn't joke about it. Like,
that's amazing.
I'm joking about people who have to reach out to these experts, like, in a flip way. But just the mentalization, I think you said, or
so there's like sort of, I think there's 3, maybe 4 sort of empirically tested, shown to work treatments for this diagnosis.
Right, and it could vary given the patient, right?
It varies within the patient. A lot of it is just like what's available, and there's not a lot available. John Gunderson created this thing called general psychiatric management, which I think they're touring the country with, because you don't have to. It's sort of a combination of the sort of major treatments that are used for it. And so the major treatments are dialectical behavioral therapy, which was this treatment created by this woman, Marsha Linehan. And it's a combination of Hegelian dialectics, which sounds super fancy, but like what Michelle is talking about.
Hegel was the philosopher?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the philosopher. So what Michelle is talking about with devaluing and idealizing and splitting, you sort of have to hold things dialectically. So the person's not all good and they're not all bad, or sometimes they're great and sometimes they're not great, and I'm not going to lash out at them and destroy the relationship when they're not great, because I'm going to hold the fact that they're sort of like complex and nuanced, and so am I. So that's and then it's Zen Buddhism is a part of DBT.
So is it like chanting and that kind of thing?
People, I mean, there's like a module, a mindfulness module, but it's built throughout all of there's sort of these modules, these 4 modules that you do: mindfulness, distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, and emotion regulation. So there's actual skills and worksheets that you fill out. And so one of the main worksheets that certainly I got introduced to when I was in treatment, and I must have filled out like 700 of them, was emotion regulation worksheet, homework sheet 1, where you have to identify when you have like I was told, when you have a spike in emotion, fill one of these out. And those sheets, to me, sort of anatomize, give you the anatomy of mindfulness. So you sort of will say, well, what is you identify the feeling.
It forces you to identify.
Right. So like if you have a borderline diagnosis, there's a very strong chance that you are not good at identifying how you feel initially. Like you've done many things in your life to avoid how you feel. So I think like a common thing that happens when people first go into treatment, it's like a therapist is like, how do you feel? And you're like, I don't know. I have no idea. So you may have all these strong reactions, but to actually parse out what's going on is insanely difficult. And so this begins to let you do that because you actually, are like forced to have to think about how you feel, and then you have to identify things like the prompting event and then the interpretation of the event, and then a whole, how you feel in your body, what your actual response was to that feeling / event, how you are using sort of skills to modify your response if your response was going to be sort of
so somebody you make a plan like you to meet somebody, and they don't show up.
Okay.
That could trigger
totally
right. That could be like because there's a rejection.
Yeah, and there's rejection sensitivity.
All these different things. Meanwhile, they could be stuck on a subway.
Absolutely.
And you don't even consider that.
So and so what you're talking about with that, when you say you don't even consider it, but you said meanwhile they could be stuck on the subway. So that
immediately makes me not a candidate for that diagnosis.
Yeah, that's actually called mentalizing, which is the other treatment, which is all about injecting doubt and uncertainty and asking questions to try to round out the event.
I told you, Otto. He's
there you go. That's actually Peter Fonagy.
Oh, no. Excuse me, Peter Fonagy.
But you're not borderline, I guess. You can do those things.
There's got to be another explanation.
You can do those things.
I am a narcissist, though.
I doubt it. I think I might be, but I don't know if you are.
I don't think you are.
I think a lot about DBT is just trying to train the patient or the person with borderline to stay in the moment. And because I think people with borderline also get triggered very easily. They may be past traumas, childhood traumas.
You're predisposed.
So
it's silly to be.
Oh no, I'm not. First, I think there's a misconception that a lot. I mean, I think some people there's a higher trauma percentage in the borderline population with like the capital T trauma, like rape, abuse, that kind of thing. Not sort of standard trauma that we all go through, but there's an equally high percentage of people who they would say sort of subtle neglect. So you could come from a family where there's an apparent a lot of love and a lot of sort of the parents are, there's not abuse. I mean, there's zero capital T trauma. I might be a unique case, but I don't think I'm not actually a unique case. So there's zero capital T trauma in my life, in my history. So there's I had horrible all-girls school experience, which I think didn't help things, but I don't think,
Capital T trauma.
That's not, I looked, for a while I thought I maybe had complex traumatic stress disorder, which is a much more low-grade but persistent, subtle trauma that people experience for long periods of time. So that is, it's a slightly more complicated experience maybe because it's not, you don't have as obvious a sort of culprit who's done the trauma to you. So there's, so I think DBT is often used to really stabilize people because people will show up in treatment programs cutting, suicide. They'll show up on a lot of times they get over-medicated. So I don't know if that was did you notice that? Was there a lot of medication going on? I can't remember. I think there was,
with Michelle Maren.
Yeah, with Michelle Maren there was.
Yes.
Right? It's funny I don't remember as much that part of the film with medication for her, if that was an issue. She was seeing doctors a lot. Yes. I do remember that.
Yeah. Yes.
Do these treatments we're talking about, do they include pharmaceuticals? Or is the whole idea not to, include them in the...
Aren't these I think the treatments that you described are generally referred to as behavioral...
They're psychosocial, is I think how you use them. Yeah,
the old-fashioned term is behavioral modification.
It's more than that, though, actually, because... So my beef with DBT was that I felt like my behavior was getting modified, and I could kind of swing that, but my insides weren't changing. And so I think they do both. Yes, you have to modify your behavior, and you also have to accept that your life sucks.
Listeners are used to the soundtrack of my podcast of
New York City.
Yeah.
So, and you're in the. This is really one of the loudest.
Nope.
Nope.
No, not necessarily. I've had plenty of sirens that are as loud. Yeah. Anyway.
So yeah, I mean, they do try to people. I don't think that it's not an. I would say that drugs are not the frontline treatment for this.
Right.
You can use them supplementally.
And people come already using or prescribe.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in the treatment place I was in, people were showing up so benzoed up.
Yeah.
I mean, just tons of Klonopin people, tons of Ritalin, tons, which actually isn't, or Adderall. I mean, people were so drugged up. So their first thing was generally to really begin to remanage the medications, get them off the Klonopin, and then benzos, which they were using to try to manage the person's feelings because the person couldn't manage the feelings. And if they can't feel, then you're screwed. The whole thing with borderline is like you need your feelings to navigate the world. So if you don't know what you feel, and if you don't learn how to identify what you feel, you're going to be making really poor choices because we need our feelings to tell us what we may not always respond. If someone, like your friend doesn't show up and your initial feeling is anger, okay, you don't want to necessarily react by lashing out. So you have to question your feelings, but you need to be able to feel. And so all those drugs will can dampen it.
Right.
So
so where are you at now since we've been talking about that?
Where am I at? When I ended up landing in treatment, which I fought very hard to get myself into, actually, I was always very controlled about the medication I took because people were always trying to shove a lot at me, and I was like, this is insane. They'd be like, you're bipolar, and I'm like, I'm not bipolar, and I'm not taking a drug, and I had eating disorder issues, so the medication they would try to push on me would be like, you'd gain weight. I'm like, how on earth is that? How will me gaining weight make my life any better, given that, that's a ridiculous thing to do to someone who's a 35-year-old woman. So I'm very vigilant and protective of my treatment. I'm very focused on always trying to be in a place where whoever I have the privilege, which is a privilege of like working with in terms of my therapist, that I'm learning. And so what I've done, I was in a treatment program for 7 months, which is a total gift and privilege. And I thank the world and my family for being able to support me to do that. And then, and that was DBT and mentalization predominantly. And it was in a program, and they were watching all of your interpersonal behavior. So they're and you're with other people who have the diagnosis. So you're just getting watched, and they're like, "What did you just do? And why did you respond the way to this person?" So you're constantly and you're getting a job. So I was working as a waitress. Okay. So you're dealing with talk about service industry, interpersonal behavior. Yeah. Like I'm bitchy to the person, they're not going to tolerate that at the restaurant, and you really have to reflect on how you treat people.
Sure.
And now I am. I work with someone who does like transference focused therapy, but I think he does a mixture of stuff. I think he's applying a lot of things.
Sure.
I think transference focused therapy. What is he? I mean, I'll tell you every little gaffe, every little I'll be like, oh, I did this, and he'll be like, wait, why did you just go? Oh, I did this. Like every sort of extraneous piece of affect that. Comes out in one of those sessions, he's like, wait, what was that? Why did you just do that? So I'm in, and when I came out of, part of making this film where I was like, okay, no burning bridges and finish a film. So the process of making this has allowed me to build a community of people. Mm-hmm. And so I have a work community now, and in the last sort of 4 years since I've been sort of actively out of treatment, it's been, okay, friendships that I had sort of massively messed up and destroyed. So over time, those have come back, and they've sort of organically dribbled back in, or I've reconnected with the person, or...
Yeah, don't say accidental. I think you're...
I mean, it's sort of the letting sort of time, like in other words... I wouldn't have been able to do some of what I can do now when I first got out as much as I would have wanted to.
Yeah.
And so But I have I have an incredibly rich in life in terms of relationships, which I like never dreamed would have happened. And I've worked very hard to like cultivate those relationships.
Yeah, sure.
But I would also say, because like when I hear that from people who they used to sort of not, I say this a little obnoxiously, but it's not totally meant that way. When they like would parade people through our treatment center who had sort of gotten out and were living way better lives than those of us who were in there and were clearly had sort of flailed. I used to, people would come in and they had boyfriends or girlfriends or, jobs and, things were great. And I was always like, shut up. Like, where's your connection to your history and your past and the struggle? Because we're so in the thick of it right now that what you describe is truly unbelievable. And so I wouldn't say that just because I've built this with a lot of support and, a lot of support from other people, I would still say it's always scratching at the door and there's always like more work to do. And in terms of like romantic relationships, that's hard. I'm in a relationship with someone and it is a complicated experience, and I'm doing things that I should have done at 20, at 44, which bums me out that I lost the time that I wish I hadn't lost. So
I have to say that I just find the story that you just shared with us about your own life, not only as a filmmaker, but also as a borderline patient, if that's the correct term, is utterly poignant, and I think you're heroic.
I appreciate your being so frank and for that for this.
I think that it also makes your film, now that I understand your own story, even more amazing to me.
How come? Why? Because
well,
I don't mean that so you tell me why it's amazing.
First of all, I think that you talk about the condition eloquently. You know a tremendous amount about it. And yet you also have the ability to sort of share a story, like Regina's story in your film, to a layperson without some of the density of the story that you just shared with us. I can appreciate it immensely because I know something about borderline, so I appreciate the way you talk about it, and you are clearly incredibly well educated about the subject. You've lived it, but you also know how to describe it. And anyway, I think you should make a movie about yourself.
And you maybe in a way you have, but I think saying heroic was, I think, just a reaction. Also, just a reaction to your being so open, which is refreshing. But also, you intentionally made a film about something that's really got to be difficult for you because you have experience. It's not like you avoided. You could have made a documentary about anything else.
Honestly, well, keep going. I keep it.
And I just want to say I don't remember now. So that was definitely something No, it's okay. That's one thing I wanted to definitely express is, when I was trying to think of, I almost felt like saying the same word, and I had a little moment while you were talking to kind of figure out what was heroic, and to choose to put yourself in front of that story without knowing how it was going to go down, or how you would feel making it, and how it would make you feel was brave. Or how people would respond to you, And I do want... I remember the other thing, real quick, and that is no one will know that, someone who made that film, Borderline, herself had borderline. There's no indication of that at all. It's beside the point, in a way, for the audience member.
But I don't think this is necessarily in the film, or maybe I'm projecting, but I think there's certain stories for anyone, whether you're a filmmaker, a writer, whatever, that are kind of a matter of life and death to tell. And I think that this story is a matter of life and death for you, in a very real sense. You could have either told the story about yourself or told a story about a subject that you found on Craigslist. I think they're both equally important, but I just think hearing your own story is very poignant. I was deeply moved by it, and that must be on the website, I assume, in some fashion. And if it's not, you should put it there.
We videoed me in black and We videoed. I put myself up. I had myself. Did I interview myself? I had Regina interview me, actually. I know, right? Did I interview myself? No, I had Regina interview me, and then I felt like I needed a little more. I had a little more story to tell, so I put me on the website. I did put my parents on the website, and I put my sister on the website. But I have to say that I think I truly say this not as like a bashful, humble thing, because I'm all so happy to take this information in. But the harder part of the film was not like I've always been, I think, really interested in psychology because I was reading books on it to try to save my life for so long. So I had this like very life or death approach to what I would read for like 10 years because I was trying to figure out ways to save myself. So I'm able to interact with that subject without sort of feeling triggered by it or feeling decentered. So I think it wasn't for me, and I really strongly feel that I wasn't doing, which is not what you were saying, but I wasn't sort of using the film as sort of a therapy to sort of cathect sort of my experience. I'm writing something right now, and that's a sort of a different experience that I'm having in terms of sort of writing a memoir. But I had different goals with that than sort of. I don't want to distract too much from what I was going to say, but which is the real challenge in making the film was just okay. I haven't made anything in a long time. I'm mostly doing this by myself. These people who were the teachers at UT, a few of them got behind me and backed me. I definitely can't not show up for that. Like I have to make good on my commitment to these people who are sticking their neck out for me. And then at certain points needing, the black and white interviews, I couldn't shoot those alone, or the way I wanted it to look meant that I had to pull in a crew for that. So those initial first phone calls, when I was starting to pull in crew, when I was starting to sort of, okay, the C300 had just come out, that camera, and I knew that I wanted to shoot with something that allowed, decent lenses and wasn't, I had like a DVX 100 that had been my last little video camera. And so refamiliarizing myself with filmmaking and being so rusty and having to make calls and having like nothing on my resume and having no past history that I could really comfortably share with people because I had been in the thick of psychological collapse for so long. That was the more challenging part, was like pushing through the shame I felt to show up for these shoots in the beginning anyway. And so the actual hard part of the film was just the sort of, and the exposure therapy. It was really like exposure therapy, which is what also happens with borderline. You get ashamed to go out in public because you feel like embarrassed about your life. And part of beginning to build a life is like you have to show up in spite of the hell you've created and the disaster that is your past life. You have to kind of begin to build it, and so you have to show up in the face of that shame and sort of manage it. And so there were those were actually, that was the challenge in making the film, and even figuring out how to edit, where I knew that if I was alone in the edit room, because I've disappeared into edits and just like can get depressed and not come out or get stuck, and I do love to edit, but also fearing being alone in that and that I wouldn't complete it. And so figuring out how to work with people and how to manage the time and the expenses. Anyway, all these very sort of practical things of like one foot in front of the other was where the challenge came. And I think any film would have been, and if anything, the subject made it less difficult because I actually could come clean with my history and my past, and I didn't have to hide it. And so I think it was a great choice for me because I didn't have to lie about my past. I wasn't having to like waste energy covering up. So anyway, that's all.
Well, I certainly think it was a great choice because it's an extraordinary film, and
Thank you.
I can't wait to see what you do next. But
Thank you.
In the meantime, I think you should be incredibly proud of this film and also what you've accomplished.
Thank you.
It's really remarkable.
That's well said.
Thank you.
And so where is it going to be? It premiered. Where did it premiere?
So it premiered last winter at Big Sky Documentary.
Oh, you mentioned that already.
Right, which
and then,
I love Big Sky. Have you been to Big Sky? They're lovely.
He shakes his head.
Lovely.
And then you were just had your New York premiere,
right? Which at Doc NYC, which was like
a big deal.
Amazing. Yeah.
And
it was amazing.
2 sold out screenings.
Yes.
And what's next?
We're figuring that out.
Sure.
Like, I'm trying to
but
figure out.
is there another festival in the?
No, there's festivals that have reached out to us now, and I just have ambivalence. I don't know if I'm supposed to say it. Like
okay.
I have mixed feelings about applying to more festivals, and certainly applying and spending money because
what is your goal, right?
Well,
is it just to?
I have to be strategic about it, and I'm not sure how good I am at being strategic about.
Well, there's no wrong or right
suggestions?
answer. No, because there's no wrong or right answer. Some people, their goal is to get it into as many festivals.
Right.
I mean, on one end of the spectrum. No, I know. I've spoken to people who say they just want to put it in every single festival they can possibly put it on, and they just do that. And then there's others on the other end who, are far more.
What were you going to say? What were you going to jump in?
I don't necessarily think you need to do many more festivals. I think that what you've described in terms of your website is very important. I think there are some festivals like Rendezvous with Madness in Toronto. They loved your film. It just came to them a bit late. I'm sure they would show it next year. I have some people I'll tell you about in Toronto. Gladly, but I think you're at a stage where you could kind of focus
right
the outreach because if you've already had 50,000 people look at the shorts, it means there are a lot of people who are aware of the film and are going to benefit from the film and the website, and that's really where I think you should focus.
Yeah, and then of course, right, and the educational distribution seems an obvious component.
Right. I mean, that's what we're working with. Sort of an impact strategist person.
Right. You said that.
Right. And so that's sort of a combination of conferences. We get emails. We just set up an email on our or a link on our website that says on the landing page that says host a screening, and if you click on that, it asks a bunch of questions, and you fill it out, and then based on that, we reach out to you, and so we're sort of. We're doing. I mean, I think when Suzanne Mitchell, who also is, Suzanne, right?
Well, we were obviously she's a producer of the film.
Yeah.
And then she made a film about 4 years ago.
Right. She made a film, Running Wild.
Running Wild. That's right. And I had somebody was at Slam Dance where it premiered, and interviewed her for the podcast at the time. So she's been on the show.
Yeah.
I did do the interview for that.
Okay. So so she came in the edit stage, and we've been working together on and off in in terms of her sort of producing and helping me get it out there. And it's I mean, you probably, Michelle, know that. I mean, the getting it out there for your film is no joke. And it's like the fourth leg of it. Yeah. And it's no joke. And there's a conflict between putting time into doing that for me and starting another project and trying to do you have that? Does that? I mean, it's
the part like, where you're not paid for it, right? I mean,
in theory though, you can get paid at these screenings, and
sure.
Because I have
that makes sense.
experience
in
with
the educational world,
educational, and because I'm actually a valid person to speak because of my actual personal connection to the film and subject, because I have had the diagnosis, I have had treatment, I have something real to say, maybe not so real to say, but I have something to say about it, and. But so there is, so that's the combination of those things would mean yes, I should be able to get paid for it. I mean, I think my goal would be to be able to make enough money back from that so that the person who's I can cover the cost of the impact strategist, I can cover some of the cost of Suzanne, and maybe a little money for me. And to be honest, I don't know, I would love to, if Regina's involved in the screenings, then she should get paid, so.
Of course. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess.
The thing is, though, you pay. I was talking to someone who's a therapist, and it's hard if she's like, I'm in the helping profession. And you just, and she's now managing her husband. Her husband's also a therapist, and she's sort of doing his, the managing of appointments. And he always wants to give his therapy away for free, and she's like, you can't. We need to survive.
That's right. And it's very true. I do the same thing. People ask me to help all the time, and had to learn how to say, I have to be paid. I can't do stuff, or I just have to choose things that pay me, that not choose things that don't. But I had on recently this filmmaker named Alexander Lehman, who has a documentary out called "Asperger's Are Us," and it's just coincidental that it deals with an autism, and it's nothing related to borderline at all. But it's about a comedy troupe. These 4 guys who all have Asperger's. They're in Boston, interestingly enough.
Are they part of the Asperger's Association?
I don't know. They created this comedy troupe.
Wow.
And it's all scripted. They're not doing improv. They're doing scripted comedy shows in front of audiences. And the name of their troupe is Asperger's Are Us. And so the filmmaker, they got paid, for participating and for helping to promote also. And so, it's what people are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right. I mean, I always said not like it's making any money, but if it were, I would cut Regina a percentage of it. And I actually have, what's that?
Cut her into the deal.
No, there's no, but I have mixed feelings about like paying and not paying people who are in front of the camera because, because in many ways, I really want to because they're giving of their time.
Well, sure. I mean, you can justify it if she's doing Q&As and
definitely,
all that, and just
but
she interviewed you for the website,
right? She did. Well, Gray, what's it called? Grey Gardens. They paid them. Did you know that they paid the Maisel brothers? I think had a $100,000 contract with them to film for a year.
That will.
That's what I read.
They also moved.
I read that on the internet, though.
Yeah, I mean, they really. True. Well, I don't know. Unfortunately, we can't ask Al anymore.
No.
Or even and their editor. I think what was the editor they used to work with? This woman. Anyway.
Yeah.
We are adrift. Finally, we should probably wrap things up for both of you guys as well as myself. But Borderline, we'll keep people in touch. It's put out such an incredible conversation without allowing people to see it is it seems unfair on a certain level. But what we'll do is we'll keep our audiences in touch with you and the film. People again. What's the website?
So I was going to say we have a Facebook page. We're good about responding. We respond pretty.
You engage with your audience.
We try. Okay. We certainly try. Yes. So our Facebook page. God, I don't know if you actually go to our website. That's a better way to get to our Facebook page because then you just click on the Facebook icon, and so they're both
Borderline documentary.
And the website itself is www.borderlinethefilm.com.
Okay, Borderline the Film. I don't know that you have to say W.
I know. Do you?
Anymore.
Okay, borderlinethefilm.com.
People now know it's implied. I mean, if you were to do that, you may as well add on the HTTP //
If you want to host a screening,
that's important.
And you click on the menu item screenings, it will take you to our screening section, which will tell you where we're screening. We are in the process of setting up more screenings, and you can say host a screening. Click on that. A form will come up, and you fill it out, and then we'll reach it. We'll follow up with you on that form. You can email us from the website. We're reachable. Go to the website, and that's your best way to start to build connection with us because we have multiple ways that you can reach us once you get to our website.
And the film really does have, it says everything, but it also does have humor in it, and we want to mention that.
Thank you.
I think you said something about that and the editing and how, and some of it might make you squirm a little, but that's good too because it keeps you thinking and not too complacent. And Michelle, people interested in seeing your work, I know that you gotten
an Autobiography of Michelle Maren is currently being distributed by Documentary Educational Resources. You'd have to look up the website, but presumably it's Documentary Educational Resources. It's der.org.
Okay.
DER, the abbreviation. And you'd find the film there. You can see it on Vimeo, I believe, also on demand. Through DER, and it's in educational distribution, and I think at a certain point we'll make it even more readily available. Right now we're trying to do these institutional and educational sales that are a little pricey.
Well, sure, understood, and it's important to recoup your losses, and making a documentary is a costly undertaking, to say the least. Well, thank you both.
Thank you.
And Rebbie, stay in touch.
Thank you.
Too, and you two could co-host an episode.
Oh, my God,
me and Michelle's next work, his next 15-minute film. You could,
I would love to. I'd be
or
honored
30
to.
minute. I'm
I'd
sorry,
be
30 to
honored
40 minute.
You're
film.
like a host in and of yourself.
He is. I mean,
amazing.
it was I don't know. It's like a gift.
I think it just comes with
these.
about 30 years of teaching film production.
Well, trust me, I feel like I could take a year off and just hand the podcast over to Michel Negroponte, and it would be in good hands.